And welcome back to Reverse Your Thinking. It's my pleasure this afternoon to introduce you to Carol Pilkington. With over 30 years of combined training in spirituality, astrological counseling, personal development, and deep transformational work, Carol works with high-achieving entrepreneurs and business owners living in a state of anxiety, depression, grief or loss, and feeling isolated. She shows them how to move through and beyond it so they can live life with more presence, energy, and joy. She's also a member of the education program manager of Age Well Academy for the Foundation of Senior Services. And she is also a senior partner of the Wellness Universe. Carol, thanks for making it on the show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
It's our pleasure. So maybe we could start off with a little bit of your history, about your journey to where you started out and to where you are now, just to give our audience an idea of the things that have made an impression upon you and brought you to the position that you currently hold.
Well, when I was a child, I had an experience, you could call it a spiritual download, if you will, that I was love. Now, that was a great experience, but as a child, with no one to talk to about it, I wasn't part of a religious family. So I didn't have a church to go to for any kind of explanation or understanding of what I had just experienced. So it was mine to hold, if you will, and to figure out over my lifetime. And it was an interesting thing because it was counter to everything that I saw around me. I did not see a lot of love around me in the community, in the world. I saw a lot of suffering, pain, anger. And so what was I to do with this thing called love that I'm supposed to be? So just like everybody else, I went through the trials and tribulations of life and tried to figure things out on my own. And there came a time when I was just suffering, if you will, in this human condition enough to ask for help. And you know what, I believe that whatever we are looking for, it is looking for us. It's kind of the last sentence of a Rumi poem. What we seek seeks us. And that happened with me. I found a teacher that could take me to a level of standing and experience that enabled me to fully experience and understand what I had experienced back as a child, so that I could embody it and live from that place of love and understand what real love is. And it felt very unifying within. And I wanted others to experience that kind of thing so that they could live their life from that place.
Did you grow up in California?
No, I'm originally from New York. So I slept right in the middle of Suffolk County.
Right. So that's
Long Island.
For those of us listening who don't know, that's eastern part of Long Island. Okay. And how did you get out of California?
Sister that lives in Santa Clarita. She came out in 1974, early 74. And for several visits, and I felt at home here. I felt like I belonged here. And so I moved out here in 1977.
77. Okay. So did you get your epiphany in relation to love after you came out to California or before?
When I came out to California, I was 23 years ago.
And did that person sort of become a mentor to you? Was that the role they played, or was it a spiritual advisor? Both.
Spiritual counselor, teacher, best friend.
Okay.
Was very life-changing.
Is that person still in your life?
Absolutely.
Oh, okay, good. All right.
Closely together.
Excellent. Now, one of the interesting things about your bio is you talk about a lot about doing this kind of work, but doing it in the corporate sphere, which and a lot of people listening don't necessarily put corporate and spirituality in the same sentence. Maybe you could give us insight into how that happened and what that looks like.
I think people can more relate to what's known as nowadays as emotional intelligence.
Okay.
So I don't make any differentiation between the two, because who we are at a base level is our spiritual being, and
Uh-huh.
everything grows and stems from that. And when we are not, through our traumas and conditioning and programming, just as you were mentioning in your segment at the top of the show,
Yeah.
building character, all of that is absorbed to our psyche at a very young age until we begin to, if question it, right? It's at the point that we begin to question the things that we have absorbed in our into our psyche
Mm-hmm.
that may not be right to us anymore. We begin to build our own sense of character, our own sense of who we really are.
Uh-huh. Okay.
And that's the beginning of building emotional intelligence.
Okay. So another looking within for the answers versus externally.
Absolutely. Those will be the only true answers.
Okay.
Right.
So I agree. Okay. That journey to find their emotional intelligence, how did that tie into the work that you do on a corporate level?
Well, on a corporate basis, I worked in the corporate world myself. I was in information technologies, so that's a very logical mind, very linear, and so I had the ability to incorporate all the skills, the hard skills, from the two, and blend them with the soft skills that I had that a lifetime.
Okay.
So that's what I need to work with organizations and companies.
I see.
And people in the HR. Worked in HR for a time myself, long time ago.
Okay. Gotcha. Right. So you're a multi-published author, correct?
I am.
Yeah, I think you've got 3 books.
Yes.
Yeah.
I have one astrology. I'm contributing 2 other books, Completing Cycles of Action,
Uh-huh.
contributing chapters,
Uh-huh.
and then the myths and questions that people have about astrology.
Uh-huh. Okay. Well, can take a turn into that for a second, to astrology.
Absolutely.
Can you give us 2 or 3 what I'll call facts versus fictions regarding astrology, things that people might believe that aren't necessarily consistent with the facts?
Yes, a lot of times we talk about Mercury retrograde, all the different retrogrades. Oh, it must be Mercury retrograde. Oh, it must be a full moon. We attribute the circumstances of what's going on around us versus taking responsibility for contributing to whatever is happening in our world. And so the myth is that it's because Mercury retrograde is the reason why my computer is broken down, or because my car is broken down. No, it's just so happens that things go for long enough, and it's that period of time that you're being prompted to pay attention to it now. So there's a correspondence as and so it's because of, it's just a letting us know, a meeting of wills, if you will, that what is happening with us now that we've been avoiding, we have to pay attention to. The full moon, people talk about, there's a particular energy around the full moon that seems to make people crazy. Well, it all depends. It doesn't make everybody crazy, or else we'd be in a world of hurt. It affects some people that way, and it all depends upon how it is affecting their birth chart, if you will, without giving an astrology lesson.
Well, just to example, do you feel that there's an astrological aspect to people on a full moon, or is it the scientific aspects of the fact that on a full moon there's a greater gravitational pull from the moon?
Both, actually, both. And for some, it might affect them more given what's going on in their chart and in their life. When the moon was making a particular aspect to a part of my astrological chart deeply. Now, somebody else around me might not have been feeling anything, but I felt it, and it affected me. And I began to pay attention to them and what Pacific, they're different that went around. Takes
Mm-hmm.
28 days or so for the moon to go around a full cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And that corresponds to a woman's menstrual cycle. So
Mm-hmm.
women often feel the movement of the moon,
Mm-hmm.
if you will, because it intrinsically affects them at a physical level. So
Very,
that's
yeah, very much in the same way that it affects tides,
yes,
ocean tides.
exactly.
Right. Okay. When you were talking a few moments ago, it seemed to me that a lot of things that you were touching on are things that people talk about in religious terms as well, in particular with regard to their relationship with God in monotheistic religions. All right. In terms of it being the fault of Mercury in retrograde or being the fault of God or, that it's on them. Do you see the comparison there between externalizing in regard to astrology versus externalizing in regard to religion?
Definitely. I mean, when we responsibility anywhere outside of ourselves,
Okay.
there you make that comparison. But when we can take responsibility for everything that we're experiencing,
Mm-hmm.
life can be a lot less chaotic and more in.
Okay. And yet, the majority of people study will analyze the fault of a circumstance as opposed to taking personal responsibility for it. Do you have a theory about why that is? Why as human beings we tend to look outside us for the answers?
Well, I can only come from my own,
That's what I mean.
right? So how can I put this? Each one of us has their own lens through which they perceive the world, and I'm no different. And until I began to see that I am the central element in every scenario in my life,
Okay.
whether I'm meeting people, whether I'm doing a job, no matter what it is, I am the central entity in that particular sphere arena.
Uh-huh.
And when I began to question and take a look at that and recognize that, it made me realize that I am the central and only person that is responsible for what's happening around me as
Mm-hmm.
I see it, perceive it, and as for what I do.
Mm-hmm.
But before then, everything was happening to me,
Mm-hmm.
and life and a challenge and painful. But it was because I didn't have the tools with which to see all that was happening in my world. Like there were life necessarily, I was
Mm-hmm.
making it hard.
Okay.
I had support, had opportunities, but it was like the blinders were put over. I put the blinders on my eyes and I couldn't see all the opportunities and support that I really had around me. I literally was in my room one time, this was many years ago, when I was saying life is so, and boom, I stopped right smack in the middle of that sentence.
Uh-huh.
And I said, life is not hard. I have had opportunities. I've had people supporting me. I am making my life hard. My life changed at that moment. When we have those kind of epiphany moments,
Mm-hmm.
and we need to pay attention to those moments,
Mm-hmm.
right? We need to
Right.
be able to pay attention and build on those moments.
Mm-hmm.
That can be
Gotcha.
the beginning of intelligence.
People that will use phraseology, will talk and say things like "you make me feel," right? And I always find that curious because I've always felt that how you feel about something is dependent upon what you believe. Okay, it's what you about something that's happening, and it sounds in a lot of ways that what you're talking about is changing one's belief system. We're going to take a short break, but when we come back, I want to pursue that a little bit with you and find out how what you do and what you call your cycle of action ties into that. This is Reverse Your Thinking. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back after this. And welcome back to Reverse Your Thinking. I'm your host, Matthias Marc Gertz. We're talking with Carol Pilkington. And Carol, before the break, we were talking about people's belief systems, particularly with regard to what causes them to feel a certain way. Many people feel that the way they feel is being caused by external activating events, what other people are doing to them, as opposed to their belief system about those activating events. And I know you address a lot of this in your writings and when you speak. And you have something called the cycle of action, do you not? Can
Yes.
can you explain to us what that is and what you mean by that and how that might tie into this conversation?
Sure. Completing cycles of action is ultimately about unity. Hold that thought.
Okay.
There's a beginning, middle, and end to a cycle. And I'll give you a very mundane example. We have the year, which begins January 1st and ends December 31st. And that's a cycle. Each year is a cycle in a lifetime, in a lifespan. And then each month is a cycle unto itself. So there are cycles within cycles within cycles. And when we are interacting with others, our perceptions are what enable us, if you will, to see the world from our own reality. And oftentimes we don't take responsibility for those perceptions. So for instance, when someone, like you said, you did this to me, or you said this to me and you hurt me. There's another way of framing that. If you really want to take responsibility for something, for how you're feeling about something. And what I have learned to do is say, I perceived, or my perception is that when you said ... you meant this, and I felt this as a result.
Yeah, that would be
Versus
more accurate.
You hurt me, right?
Right.
All of the finger pointing is make someone else responsible for what you're feeling. And so when we can have that mutual understanding of communication, that we each take responsibility for what we experience and feel, there are no longer any misunderstandings. There are no longer any hurt feelings out there. And the cycle of communication is complete. And the thing about completing cycles of action is that when you complete a full cycle of action, you do feel complete, like there's nothing else to say about the matter.
Okay. Is this the same thing?
Nothing else to think about.
Right. Is this the same thing as like goal setting a goal and then acting on it? Anything. It applies to anything. Okay.
Anything. So for instance, you have a project that you're doing. So you're booking people on your show. You prepare for the show, you get the guest. There's preparing the guest to be on the show, and then you have the show. The show ends. All of those things within that whole span from start to finish are cycles. Right? Sure. And each time you complete any part of that, you can feel, okay, I'm complete with that. I can go on to the next thing. And so when we're not feeling complete and we keep that cycle open-ended, and it doesn't get complete, there's an accumulation of incomplete cycles, and
Mm-hmm.
that has an effect on our psyche.
Gotcha.
Conflicts that we have with one another, those conversations that we were talking about earlier, when those
Right.
go unfinished, there are feelings that are, and thoughts that are left unsaid, and feelings left unprocessed.
Mm-hmm.
Those are incomplete cycles. And we have tons of those throughout our whole life that we don't think about, but they're there weighing on us. You know, we talk
Mm-hmm.
about sometimes we hear about the busy mind, the monkey mind.
Mm-hmm.
Those are all the incomplete cycles that we have rummaging around and vying for
Oh,
attention in the mind.
okay. Are you talking about cycles that people have abandoned, or you're talking about cycles that people just haven't finished completing or have gotten distracted from, or all of the above?
Nothing is complete if you're still thinking about it.
Ah, well, there you go. There you go. Okay. I got you. Yeah, I like that. So a few moments ago, you were talking about phraseology. You were talking about, not saying, you made me feel this way, and instead using terminology that's different. That's more taking responsibility. There's this book called Taking the War Out of Our Words. I don't know if you're familiar with it, by Sharon
No.
Ellison. We had her as a guest on the show, where and the entire book is about doing just that. It's about changing the way you say things so that it doesn't become an adversarial situation. All right. Her premise is that our normal everyday speech is based upon a war footing, based upon the concept of doing battle. All right. And
Mm-hmm.
she talks in this book about taking the battle out of your speech in that regard. Um, so we were talking, so I could relate to what you were talking about there. So you were talking about cycles of action. I was wondering, is there one significant cycle of action that maybe you've completed that had a major impact on your life that you could share with us?
Yes. A lot of cycles sometimes can have to do with grief.
Uh-huh.
My father passed away in 2004, and my father and I had a wonderful relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And but one thing that happened is that I wasn't there for his last breath.
Mm.
I was in the hospital with him that day. My sister and I both were, but we had to go back home. He lived in Vegas and we lived in here in
Uh-huh.
Los Angeles, and we had to get back here for something. I don't know what it was, but at the end of the day, I felt that it wasn't important enough for us to take us away from being by his bedside.
Uh-huh.
And he died around 9:05 that evening, and we had just missed him by 5 minutes.
Uh-huh. Oh, wow.
Yeah. And
Okay.
so I felt very guilty for that for a
Mm-hmm.
while. And so that cycle was probably a good 10 years.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And what I came to, once I finally arrived at what the nature of the guilt was, I didn't have to think about it anymore. The nature of the guilt for me was that I wasn't there by his side, but what came to me is that I wasn't ready to see someone so close to me die in front
Mm-hmm.
of me.
Mm-hmm.
And when I finally had realized that, I left myself off the hook and I never had to think about it again.
Mm-hmm.
All of my experiences and all of my thoughts about my father were joyful and
Mm-hmm.
appreciative, and there was no more pain. I wasn't suffering anymore. And it's
Gotcha.
not that I thought about it every day. It's not that I thought about it every day. It didn't ruin my life,
Mm-hmm.
or it didn't interfere with me being in the world. But I recognized that everybody has a process to go through about grief, and it can be short or it can be long. But it's a process that we have to allow ourselves to go through, and we have to work at it. We have to make an effort to understand the nature of the grief. I had a conversation with someone the other day, and she said that I asked her if could the grief be that she felt guilty, that she didn't feel like she appreciated all of the things that she had with her husband while he was alive. And it was like a light bulb went off in her head.
Hold that thought. Hold that thought. We have to take a break for our sponsors, and we'll be right back on Reverse Your Thinking right after this. And welcome back to Reverse Your Thinking. Carol, you were talking with a friend of yours, and the light bulb went on. Can you finish that story for us?
Yes. And when that light bulb came on for her, it was like there was a level of release that I don't think that she had felt in a long time. And it was still something that she had to process, but it was a moment of clarity. And when we can build on those moments of clarity, it can help us clear our mind, and it can help us complete cycles.
Gotcha. Okay. Tell me, this whole idea of cycles and personal responsibility, it ties very closely into traditional psychology, and working through things over long periods of time. When I hear you talk, I think of my own sessions, and I think of all of a sudden waking up one day, either after or during a session, and all of a sudden you get this aha, you get this insight that feels like it came out of nowhere, but it was really progressive, slowly bubbling up to the surface until all of a sudden it pops into your consciousness. Have you had, obviously you have had experiences like that, correct?
All the time.
All the time. Okay. All right. So how do you balance multiple ongoing cycles in your life? And what practices or what systems do you use to ensure that you complete a cycle?
When I began seeing my whole life through this lens of cycles, and I became so aware of it in my life, like finishing a project, or even the most mundane tasks of doing laundry. Sometimes we do our laundry, put it in the washing machine, we take it out, put it in the dryer, we take it out, but then we leave it in the basket, and we don't fold the clothes and put them away, right?
Right.
And so that's an incomplete cycle. And even the smallest and mundane cycles, if we begin to build on those things, it can help us clear the cobwebs of the mind and help us think more clearly and make better decisions. And so you could have multiple cycles going on at once, but just know that whatever you have done within a particular cycle, you've done it to the best of your ability in that moment. That could feel like a complete cycle until you pick it back up again. Like for your business, you're a mortgage lender, right? You do reverse mortgages.
Right. I'm a reverse mortgage lender.
And so within that, there are tasks that you do, but also that need to be completed by other people. So those are incomplete cycles, and you're dependent on others to complete their end of the thing, whatever that is. So you can just say, I've done as much as I can for now, and be done with it right there, right now, right then and there, until it's time for that other piece to come in that other bit of information to come in to complete that cycle. When I say that I have done the best I can for now,
Mm-hmm.
it closes the cycle off for me in that particular moment for that particular thing. That doesn't mean that it's not something that I'm going to pick up later and do
Mm-hmm.
more work on. It's just
Right.
that I'm done for now. And
Gotcha.
that helps clear the mind and open us up for more things to come in and
You do
for us to have a clarity.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to overstep you. You do a lot of work in the senior community, correct? With people like
Mm-hmm.
55 and up, all right?
Yes.
What do you see with older adults, people in their 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s? How does this concept of taking personal responsibility and completing cycles fit into your counseling with them with regard to quality of life issues and facing death?
That's a really great question. I do a lot of teaching and educating and working with seniors in this realm.
Mm-hmm.
And for the most part, they really understand it because I do a program on completing cycles of action as we age.
Uh-huh.
And I help them understand the cycle of aging that they're in, helping them to accept where they are in their own aging process.
Right.
And of course, with acceptance of the people that they've lost along the way, as they get
Mm-hmm.
older, there more and more people around them are dying, obviously, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I help them work through the isolation, the grief, and the social connectivity of, you know, going through the grieving process, but always also knowing the importance of social connection and maybe learning new things to
Uh-huh.
help them stay alert, keep their mind fluid
Right.
and
Right.
flexible.
You know, one of the things that I encounter quite a bit as a mortgage broker, particularly when I'm working with reverse mortgages, is that many people, especially when they get into their early 80s and beyond, become very rigid about the idea that they want to stay in their house. And
Mm-hmm.
and I find myself in situations because I'm brought in to try to fund those type of situations. But at the same token, I'm very aware of the fact that many times they would be better off, okay, in at least researching what it might be like to be in a more social environment, okay, in an assisted living or something like that. But the problem becomes not that they're not willing to consider it, but they're not, all right. But the problem becomes that you can't even get them to visit,
Mm-hmm.
all right, to take that responsibility. There's a fear that becomes about like an impenetrable wall, and the conversation becomes very rigid. Quickly, is there any one little thing that can be done to open up their minds to get them to consider options?
I think if they begin to talk more openly about the nature of the fears, that can help penetrate and
Mm-hmm.
break down that rigidity, because when they can really understand the nature of their fears and speak it out loud instead
Right.
of it being this invisible wall that they might see,
Right.
I think that can really help a lot. And
Okay.
maybe even bringing someone in that has experienced another, that community living,
That's
that
a
can
that's
share with them
the
their
experience.
experience.
That's a great idea. Carol, if anybody in our audience wants to get a hold of you and discuss working with you as a coach or with regard to astrology, what's the best way to reach you?
The best way to reach me is going to my website, carolpilkington.com/counseling.
Okay. Is there a phone number or an email that you'd want to share with us as well?
Yes, sure. My email is carol@carolpilkington.com.
Okay, terrific. Carol, thank you so much for joining us today. It was great having you, and I can't tell you how much we enjoyed listening to your cycle of action. For those of you that are listening, thank you so much for coming back. Get home safe, kiss your family, have a great weekend, and we'll see you again next week on Reverse Your Thinking.